Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Unravel Show with my guest, Brian Simmons. Great to have you back, Brian. Thanks for being here again on a morning, and it's an hour behind what I am here. So I appreciate you being willing to join us in the morning here.
Well, thanks, man. I'm glad you had me back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I thought last episode was just tremendous. I thought it was a really good discussion. And I really appreciated the back and forth dialogue, and we approached some issues at the end, which we needed to elaborate more on, and was no way we were going to cover it in that episode. So we prolonged it and did another part here. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. I'm going to just summarize from last week, or whatever it was, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, we did it. And I tell you what, let's do this. This will be more fun than just me summarizing. I'm going to try to steel man your argument, and you steel man mine. Is that fair?
Sure.
Let's try to do
Yeah,
that.
definitely.
And then I'll do my whole thing, and then you correct first wherever I'm wrong, and then vice versa. So if I'm understanding your position correctly, it's that there is a desire within us to see justice served for crimes committed, for what you would call sin, evils done. And because that desire is built in us, it seems more reasonable to presuppose that there is a God that would mete out that justice at some point than it would be to be an atheist and assume that this is the best kind of justice we're going to get. Partially because motive does matter. What we desire, what we think, if we want to harm someone, even if we never actually pull it off, that thought in itself would be considered an immoral act, I guess it wouldn't be an act, an immoral thought, because what we're aiming for is 100% purity, or as I'm imagining you would call it, holiness. And because we lack that, because we don't have that here in the world we live in, it is the most reasonable position to assume that there must be something greater that's going to remedy all of those issues than to just say, well, this is the best we got. How's that? Am I pretty on point?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good representation of the points that I was making in our last conversation. I would only substitute that word must for can. Can be it can be something that we can accept as reasonable rather than it must be. I want to assume there's other options out there. And so, look, atheism is one of those options. Maybe what we're seeing here in real time is haphazard. It's just a product of a process of the chemistry of the universe, if you will. But for me, it's all about different options and choosing different options, trying not to limit those options, say one or two, but opening the door to other options. And so theism would be something that I think would be reasonable in light of what you just mentioned, as a summary of my view. But yeah, you came very close to what I believe.
Okay, so Brian, if I may, and I don't want to title you, but from what I just heard you say, it almost sounds like you would be an agnostic.
Yeah. No, I'm not an agnostic. I'm actually a believer, but I am. I think everybody is an agnostic to some point, and I think there is a healthy agnosticism that we can bring to the table, which is going to be in contrast to, say, just blindly accepting a creed or a formulation of doctrine or a view of God that we've been handed down to us. But I think we all exercise healthy agnosticism and healthy skepticism in our daily lives. And it doesn't even have to be theistically related. We could just say that this person sounds to me like a BS artist, and I don't want to listen to them because it's putting up some red flags. But I think that there is healthy skepticism, healthy agnosticism that can be exercised within the domain of religion and especially within the domain of organized Christianity. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I wouldn't classify myself an agnostic any more than, say, anyone else would consider themselves to be agnostic on certain issues.
Okay, so without calling you an agnostic, is it safe to say that I heard correctly that you are not proposing that God, theism, Christianity, religion, if I may just put them all in one category for a moment, just for this statement, that is not a thing you are saying that 100% is the answer to this problem. You're simply saying it can be. It's one possibility, but it's also possible that God doesn't exist.
Sure. I
Is that
mean, it's
fair?
always possible. Yeah, it's possible that God doesn't exist. I see myself, I'm more of a pragmatist, so I'm approaching this through more of a pragmatic perspective. What is the cash value of a truth claim in experiential terms? And so the cash value of theism would be acting with more, as we mentioned in our last podcast, with more ethical integrity, or at least we would expect ourselves to act with more ethical integrity if we feel that there's a reward or a punishment at the end of the line. But I'm looking at it from a chiefly pragmatic perspective. I'm a philosophical pragmatist, and so you might call me a consequentialist. But that's the perspective I'm taking on this. I'm not making any unanswerable truth claims as if this is the only thing that you can believe. There's other options out there, but I don't see how non-theism is going to work as a living principle, as a practical principle. I think theism works better than non-theism, and I think it's more reasonable in light of our daily ethics. If I feel that there's going to be something at the end of the line for me in terms of reward or punishment, well, that's going to modify my behavior in the here and now. And we could even roll it back and restrict, rewards and punishments to this life, even from a theistic perspective. So if I feel that, that if I do something wrong, well, karma or God is going to get me in this life, well, that also is going to modify. So it doesn't even have to have anything to do with the afterlife. It could just be restricted to this life. One can even say that heaven and hell are here and now. And there's no problem really with that. I think I like to take a minimalistic approach, because that's where we could find commonality between our respective belief systems, rather than overextend myself and say, well, you have to jump through all these hoops in order for us to agree on just simple basic propositions.
All right. So, believing that the theist position is the strongest, most probable, and best option, not probable, I'm going to take that out. I shouldn't have said that. Believing that is the best, more reasonable option, according to you, also, at the end of the day, would not make it so. It just makes it the preference, correct?
Ultimately, it's going to be based on preference, yeah, because we all make choices as to what. I mean, nobody's forcing our hands to be, to accept a certain religion. In certain cultures, that may be the case, but in our American society, in our American culture, in the 21st century, as it is here and now, it's largely a matter of choice. So we're going to make decisions that are based on our own needs and our own preferences, and that's something that we all admit. We all, we put up these facades of ideology, but I think we all admit at rock bottom that we're making decisions based on our personal preferences.
Okay, but to my point, it doesn't make theism correct. It just makes it the most desirable.
To an extent, yeah, I would agree with that to an extent, that it makes it more desirable. I would also, though, I would point out the reasonability factor. So, like I said, reasonable, it's reasonable. Just to give an example, if I walked into my job Monday and they told me there was no more boss, well, I already know that, I would probably end up doing like everyone else, the bare minimum, just to keep my foot in the door and to keep the paycheck coming. If there's no boss, there's not going to be any kind of review. So it's like, people who are taking breaks every half hour aren't going to be punished. And then people who are going above and beyond and going beyond their quota of duty aren't going to get rewarded. So everyone's going to kind of settle. It's going to be kind of a race to the bottom. Everyone's going to settle to a basic level. Then if you say, well, there's going to be a review later this year where we're going to be assessed on what we did throughout the year, And that's going to modify our behavior in the here and now. So it's reasonable to, when we start with a behavioral claim, such as that, say, murder is wrong and preserving life is right. Well, we're basing that claim on I think we're making an argument for the reasonableness of a payment down the road. Whether that even should be, or must be related to theism in its classical sense is another story. But I'm arguing not just for preference, but I'm arguing for the reasonableness of that claim.
Okay, so neither desiring something to be the case or wishing it to be the case, or even the most reasonableness and factors that play in, like having a boss that would give you some motivation to do a certain thing, all of those things that even make it the most reasonable possibility, I might even say the most reasonable probability, I'll throw that in there, it doesn't make it so, does it?
No, it doesn't make it so. There's no way to prove. I can't prove
Okay,
that God exists. I can't prove the Hindu God exists. I can't prove the Christian God exists. And I don't think anyone else can either.
got it.
Um, you know.
Cool. Well, today we're going to talk about how to then meet this out, because we're going to talk about hedonism a little bit. So this will be interesting. But before we do, let's go reverse. You ahead and steel man me now.
Okay, so and I appreciate these conversations. These are some of the better conversations I've had recently. So what we were talking about last week is I think we kind of went down a rabbit hole in a way, because we were talking about faith, and if I recall correctly, I'm going to try to represent your argument correctly. There was an argument made. I think I probably made it, that equated your belief system with mine, in the sense that we're both putting faith in, or theism is atheists are putting faith and have to exercise faith just like theists do. And you said that there was a difference between those two, only because you're going by where I'm going by a lot of guesswork. Theists are not going by information that can be measured and assessed. They're going by information that largely is either just truth claims with no backing, with no evidential backing, or what have you. Whereas you're going by truth claims that can be measured and assessed. And I think that was a good point. Of course, I'm not going to give my response to that, because I'm trying to steel man your argument. But that was the impression that I was left with, is that you're saying, no, it's not the same, because when I place faith in a supreme deity, I'm going by, there's a lot of things that I have to assume that cannot be backed with any kind of evidence. Whereas you're sitting in that chair, and you know that the chair is you're placing your trust in that chair, because you realize that it's a well-built chair, and that you haven't had any history of it collapsing on you. And you know that there's been countless others who have sat in the same chair, and that hasn't collapsed on them. So you're going by something you're going by evidence that can be seen. You're going by evidence that can be documented, that's visible, and all of that. Whereas I'm going by evidence that, I have to put my faith in something that isn't seen. And I think that's a good argument, but that seems to be where you were coming from when we dropped that thread. Did I get it right?
I mean, yeah, you're pretty close. And I would say that at this moment, I feel like you actually aren't living by the definition of faith that is typically used by Christians and is defined in the Bible. And maybe that's where the hangup is, and why you still think that we're using the same term, same level of faith. Because from what I hear you saying, we very well may be. I think I'm not 100% sure. We're gonna have to flesh this out some more. But when I hear Christians typically use faith, they mean by that, I am 100% certain that God exists. When I hear you talk about God, it's God's a great possibility, and maybe even the best possibility, but no, I'm not certain. Nobody can be certain. That's not the biblical definition of faith. The biblical definition of faith from Hebrews 11 is the evidence of things unseen, the assurance of things hoped for. So Faith, biblically speaking, is I know that I know that I know that I know. Like that's the biblical faith. You're not saying that. So you're still using rationality to determine what the best or most reasonable option is. And you're saying the most reasonable, in your opinion, isn't scientific method, it's God. For whatever reason, we may have our differences on why you're going that direction, and we may have to flesh that out. But you got to admit, you're not saying the same thing most Christians. I'm trying to interact with Christians right on the show, and I bring them on, and I'm like helping to see that it's just based on faith alone, the kind of faith that says I know that I know that I know, and then they really don't know. And then I have you and William Vincent coming on my show, and you guys are throwing me for a loop because neither one of you are either defining God consistently, and you're both admitting that you can't know that God exists with 100% assurance, which is the exact definition of faith in the Bible. So it's like I'm not even sure where to take the conversation in that regard, because you're not really basing it on faith. You're basing it on what you believe is the best conclusion on I'll say evidence, the things you see experientially going on around you. And you're saying the most reasonable conclusion here is the only reason people are going to live this way, this right way, is because they know that there must be some future judgment somewhere that's going to take place. But you also aren't sure. And it's also possible that you're wrong. That is not what I hear from Christians. I mean, that's not what I would have said when I was a Christian. I would have said, no, absolutely, 1,000%, it's God. You couldn't have convinced me otherwise. You couldn't even get me to admit that it's not, that there's a possibility it wasn't going to happen. Like it was 100%. I don't hear you saying that.
Right. Well, that's just one of the approaches that I take. I actually do have a very firm conviction in God, and it's a strong faith. I've lived a reasonably long life, and I've had a lot of experiences that have convinced me that God exists. So I'm going partly by my experiences as well, but experience is largely subjective. So I'm not going to enforce, or I'm not going to inflict my experience on others as if my experience has to be the benchmark for accepting the reasonableness of a theistic claim. But what I want to do is I want to try to be as minimalistic as possible, which is why I approached it from this perspective. Yeah, I feel that there's no way that somebody's going to prove the existence of a supreme being, only because that's what we were talking about last time, because it's not just my job to prove it, it's your job to accept it, or it's your preference to accept it. If you don't think that something's reasonable, you're not going to accept it. That's just how we're wired, to accept things that are reasonable, to reject things that are unreasonable. Now, I also want to just say quickly is that I don't think that we, the way that human beings respond in real time to faith claims is a lot of times they don't, most of the time I would say they don't go and they, do any kind of inductive investigation before they believe something. We usually believe something either because we were taught it, because we want it to be true, or because it agrees with our experiences. And so something that agrees with my experience, it would be something that I would consider to be reasonable enough to base a truth claim on. So the reasonability of claiming that ethics is important, and that ultimately they're so important that ultimately there's not going to be any good action that goes unrewarded. There's not going to be any bad action that goes unpunished. The reasonableness of that does dovetail with my experiences in this world. So it's something that I can accept. And it's one of the reasons why I think Christians, why people do accept Christianity, why people do accept religion, is because the reasonableness of those claims agrees with experience. Now, I could say that, look, I could have been a Roman Catholic for 50 years. I was raised a Roman Catholic. I was taught Roman Catholicism. And if I had never questioned those claims, I would still be a Roman Catholic. Ultimately, I had to question those claims, which made me, in that sense, it made me somebody who was skeptical of the Roman Catholic faith. But I ultimately found out there were other solutions. There was a solution that, well, you don't have to go by what the church says. You could go by what the Bible says, which was a reasonable claim, because I saw that, which, you open the Bible and it's teaching something completely different from what the Catholic Church teaches. And you've got all these other people that have accepted the Bible over what the church taught. That's a reasonable claim. It's reasonable because it agrees with experience. It agrees with the experience of countless others who have gone before me. So, yeah, as far as Christianity goes, I would say you're right. It's not something that I think I can prove. I can't prove the Hindu faith or the Confucian faith, or I can't prove those things either. But what I can do is I can make arguments for them based on reasonableness and based on, like I said, cash value. The cash value of a truth claim in experiential terms. What would be the cash value be? What would the outcome be given that these truth claims are correct? And what I'm seeing is a better outcome, or at least a more consistent outcome, in light of theism than, say, in non-theism. That's really all I'm saying.
So you said you didn't want to use experiences, and then multiple times throughout your diatribe there, you explained the experiences lined up with your reasonableness idea or whatever. So it does sound to me like you are basing your reasonableness idea on your experiences.
Partly. Yeah, definitely. Partly I am.
So is it not conceivable that the reason you are viewing your experiences the way you're seeing them is because you're filtering them through a belief system you have already, instead of filtering your belief system through reason instead of experiences?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. That's an interesting angle to approach it from. I think that, to be perfectly honest with you, I think that my experiences did lend a lot of support to my Christianity. Now, I was a Roman Catholic for many, many years, but then I wandered away from the Roman Catholic Church, and I was actually reading a lot of skeptical literature at one point. Before I got, converted, saved, I was reading a lot of skeptical literature. I was reading books about, Jesus didn't exist. I was reading books about, Christianity is bad because it's causing all these problems. And so I was leaning more towards skepticism, but I always, when it ultimately boiled down to was the fact that I needed an anchor that was more sturdy than anything I could get in the day-to-day world. And when I came to interface with the teachings of the New Testament, that changed my life completely. And I found not only reasonableness, but I found a firm anchor, and I found a firm foothold where the world wasn't giving me that. And so, yes, I believed, and I still believe fervently in the New Testament system of doctrine, because I find it to be a point of stability in an ever-shifting and ever-changing world. And I think everybody who has any kind of belief system whatsoever is going to relate to this, in that, well, if you've had bad religious experiences, or if you've suffered through religious trauma, and there's people who have been out there, suffering religious trauma for years and years before they finally break free from that from those religious communities. And they're going to say, well, I found a measure of freedom from religion that religion never gave me. So it's the same thing. It's a very similar argument that could be made on the non-theistic side in respect to religion as it is on the theistic side in respect of irreligion. I think it's part of the human experience. We're not, two totally different species of human beings. We're one species. We have a commonality of experience, a commonality of rationality, and we're able to I think find agreement in just using our experiences as guideposts towards where we're at now. I think that's the proof is in the pudding. It's something that's in us.
So do you think that somebody who, see if I can come up with a example here. Somebody who struggles with depression, chronic depression, right? And they're just looking for anything they can to help them feel like they don't have to be depressed, but feel like there's hope for them, that anything, and they'll just latch on to the first thing that actually gives them that hope and kind of makes them feel better about themselves because they're tired of being depressed, and they come across the Bible and they see these words of Jesus, or they come across the Quran, or they come across the words of Joseph Smith. Doesn't matter. It's happenstance. They pick up a book. It's just whichever one they pick up, and they find hope and they latch onto that. That experience for them becomes such a potent moment that they become convinced that God exists, whichever one it is that they landed on. And you're never going to tell them otherwise because they know 100% that the connection between overcoming their depression was 100% tied to that moment. And I know it's the words of Jesus. I know it's the words of Joseph Smith. What makes that mean that what they have found is the most reasonable option? It sounds more to me like it was a remedy to a problem they had, and therefore it appears reasonable, but it isn't actually reasonable. You and I would not, I guess I can't speak for you, but I would imagine you and I would not look at that and say, that wasn't a really reasonable way to make the decision that this particular God exists. I mean, you're not really using reason. You're just feeling better because something spoke to you in that moment. What makes that any difference than you determining that the solution to whatever it is you're struggling with is correct because you landed on the words of Jesus in the Bible?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So I would probably go to the subjectivity of the situation, and because it's if I have a drug problem, or if I have a drinking problem, or a problem with sin or with abuse or anything, and I come across the Quran, or I come across, say, the teachings of Confucius or any other religious literature, and I become a convert to that system, and it breaks those habits, and reforms my ethics. Well, that's a real reformation. That's something that's like I said, there's cash value in that. That's something that's real. Now, it's based on a subjective conception of, well, this is the truth, or it could be based on an entirely subjective conception, irrespective of any objective truth that may be in those systems. But it did the job. It got me out away from drugs. It broke me out of alcoholism. It reformed my life. It made me treat people better. And so that's a real salvation. Now we could be theistic or non-theistic. You could go to Alcoholics Anonymous and you could swear up and down that it was Alcoholics Anonymous that cured you of your alcoholism, and you could place your trust in Alcoholics Anonymous as you would with any other religion. But it's a real deliverance. It's a real salvation. It's a real freedom from what was oppressing you before. So there is a subjective aspect in accepting a truth claim as real when you don't necessarily know that it's objectively true, or may not have the resources to determine whether it's objectively true. There's that aspect, but then there's also the reality of what it did in your life, and that's not so subjective, right? So that's something that's real, because if I was a drug addict, or if I was an alcoholic and now I'm free from those things, well, I have to attribute that change to something. It's not just a random somewhere I woke up one day and said, well, I just, I'm not going to drink anymore. It's something that I have to allocate to that system of ethics which I accepted, whether it be Christianity or Buddhism or whatever. So there's a subjective element and there's an objective element. The objective element is experiential. It's I know these things have happened in my life because of something that I believed that may not be true. And that's something that, it's sort of like what I would call the Santa Claus, effect. It's the Santa Claus effect. But, we know as children, we're taught about Santa Claus. And then if we're good all the year, we'll get the good stuff. And if we're bad, we're going to get a bag of coal. And Santa Claus, we find out later that Santa Claus isn't true, that there's no person living in the North Pole with reindeer in a workshop and all that. But this subjective belief in Santa Claus models or should model our behavior throughout the year. And so it's something that we later find out that Santa Claus isn't true, that we were basing our belief on a myth or a legend. But the ethical modeling is real. The ethical modeling really happened. I didn't throw a snowball at the mailman because I didn't want Santa to deliver me a bag of coal at the end of the year. I think that's the way I'm approaching this. And I think I think that's really the only way that we can approach it if we don't have the resources to find out whether the truth claim is objectively correct.
All right. Hey, before I respond, before we keep going, I need you to ban Wesley Curry II. He is absolutely a troll. And he's disturbing. I can't do it because he's from your thread.
Oh, okay. Let me go ahead and let's see.
Just click on the 3 dots on his name there and just ban him. He's gone. He's goodness.
Okay. Sorry about that. I didn't see.
Oh, that's right. It's not your fault. It's just I had it happen to me last week. I just can't. I can't do anything about it. Good job. Thank you. Appreciate it. So to respond to you, so first of all, what you just declared at the end there tells me that there are any number of reasons why somebody would believe something, mostly because it affects their stage in life where they are in trouble, tension, or transition. And when that happens, you latch on to anything that gets you out of it. And frankly, I'm not opposed to that. I'm like, okay, well, whatever it is, because I get it. When you're in that situation, anything that will get you out of it is wonderful. But based on the fact that you even brought up Santa Claus yourself and use that as an example, it goes to show that these aren't really reasonable things to adhere to say that they are therefore things that we should believe are real. No, they're just things we believe helped us, but still very well cannot be real. And in a lot of ways, unreasonably real. The reason we don't believe Santa Claus exists is because we have zero evidence to believe that. We can go to the North Pole and we will find zero evidence of this Santa Claus. There's no flying reindeers. There's no fat man in a red suit. There's no elves making toys. There's no shop. There's nothing like so. Without evidence to demonstrate that Santa Claus is real, we literally just say, well, it's unreasonable to believe that Santa Claus is real. You just made that claim. However, it worked for this person or these people or these kids for a time, fine, but still not real. Really, God is the same way. And you've also declared and claimed you can't prove God exists. There is no evidence to substantiate that claim. There's not even evidence of the resurrection. Literally, you've just embraced a system because it helped you and helps you to resolve the dilemma you have in your mind of justice and ethics. Mm-hmm. But just because it helped you doesn't actually make it reasonable to believe in a God that you have zero evidence for with no reindeer or elves or a shop. It's just there's nothing there to substantiate. It just helped you personally. Great, but that doesn't actually mean anything other than it helped Brian Simmons. Secondly, you had mentioned that you don't just wake up one day and just decide that today's going to be my last drink and you're just done with it. It has to be connected to this thing you had. I completely disagree with that. Dude, I know a lot of stories of people who just wake up one day and say, you know what, I actually am done with this. And something just triggers in their mind and they realize how stupid this is and they're finished. Same with smokers. You're addicted to nicotine, and some people spend their whole lives white knuckling trying to stop. And some people wake up one day and realize they were brainwashed into thinking they actually like this thing that they no longer like, and they're just done. Other people need the help of a book to help them realize they've been brainwashed, to get rid of that mentality, and that helps them, and then they stop. So for example, me, I was a heavy smoker. I read Alan Carr's Easy Way to Quit Smoking, and the way he removes the brainwashing is like magic. You get to the end of the book and it's like literally just done. I don't even know how to explain what happens when you read that book. If you're a smoker, it just completely obliterates any desire you have for smoking anymore. Your desires are gone. Your cravings are gone. It's all gone. But I didn't turn to Alan Carr and say, well, it is reasonable then to believe that Alan Carr must be the God of the universe because he saved my life. I mean, at the very least, I can prove he exists. I can prove he's got a company. I can prove through evidence that he's written books. You have nothing to even demonstrate that this book you believe in was written by God.
Yeah.
So I struggle with your parallels and then turning around and saying that God is the most reasonable answer in life. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah. And those are some great points. So let me roll this back a little, because I don't know. I think we're starting to drift away in our understanding. So I believe I'm a Christian because I believe in the truth claims made by Christianity. I'm just going to leave it like that. I believe the truth claims made by Christianity are correct. Now, they can exist irrespective of any kind of hard evidence. But what I'm saying is experience is one of those avenues that I found support my belief in the Christian system of theology. So experience isn't the whole thing. It's part of the machinery. It's just one of those elements that makes the machinery run. As far as accepting truth claims without any kind of proof, this goes back to what I said about most of the time we accept something because either we were taught it, we want it to be true, or because it agrees with our experiences. So I'm not making what I'm trying to do is I'm trying not to parse my methodology, my logical methodology too finely, because I want to leave the door open just a little bit for a little bit of flexibility. Okay, so you had mentioned something about ethics, breaking habits and whatnot, and that's fine. Let me put it this way. So something that's not true, it's not objectively true, say Santa Claus, and
Or God.
or God, or you could say, and it doesn't have to be the Christian God, it could be the Hindu God, it could be the Buddhist God, it could be anything. But it turns us into different people. And this is an objective experiential transformation. People will agree that, that an ex-alcoholic, someone who has turned from alcohol, that their transformation is not just a subjective mental transformation. It's a real-time experiential transformation. Not going to have a drink anymore. So this is something that's real. This is something of which we can measure the cash value. And this is something that, irrespective of the truth claim, of the objectivity of the truth claim, it's still a real transformation. So what I'm saying, and this is the question that I guess I've been asking for quite a long time, is if there's no God, if there's no supreme deity, what difference does it make if I tell a white lie about Santa Claus, if it makes my child behave the year round? What difference does it make? It's doing a better job than if I say that there's no reward at the end of the line, there's no punishment at the end of the line. Well, what difference does it make if I lie? That's what I'm saying.
So all right. So I think it's a terrible method by which to help somebody live, is the threat of punishment and righteous or reward, because that benefit should be internal. you should have an own internal compass that says, if I do this, I will be happier. If I don't, I won't. And we're going to get into this in a moment here because hedonism is going to come up right here in this transition. If you think that the only way you can get someone to do good and not bad is by producing some sort of a penal outcome, then all you're thinking is that everybody is just these horrible people that have no ability to live good lives unless you will punish them if they don't. I seriously have a real problem with that. Like, I'm not saying I have a problem with rewards sometimes or even punishment if someone does wrong, but to use that as the only measure by which a human can be good, there's something more wrong with you than anything.
Right. But I'm not saying that's the only method. I'm not saying that.
But you said
Mhm.
if producing Santa Claus will help a child live a good life, that's a better thing to do than to not do it. And I completely disagree. If you're using Santa Claus as a penal system to teach your children how to live based on some other person's standard, rather than training them how to think for themselves and to benefit their own lives, you're not teaching them to be moral people. You're teaching them to be robots based upon what this other person says you have to do or you'll be punished.
Right. But what I'm saying is if there's no adverse consequences, if the positive effects outweigh any adverse consequences, and you've just stipulated that there's no adverse consequences for being immoral in the long run. I'm not saying the short term, but there's no adverse consequences. What difference does it make if it's getting the job done? I mean, if it's getting the positive effects that you want.
Because you're not valuing the person and their own moral system. You can't be an agent. You can't be a moral agent if the only means by which you do good is that you fear the punishment of someone who dictates to you what good is.
Right. But what if there's no supreme deity? What difference does it make?
What difference does what make?
What difference does it make whether I act according to these higher moral principles, which you're saying are more important than getting a good effect and perhaps, bending the truth a little? What difference does it make?
Well, first of all, how do we know that it's a better effect if we're just following the rules of a dictator? But secondly,
well, we would look at the results.
How do you know the results until they happen?
Well, this is going to be based on trial and error. It's going to be based on past experience. There's a lot of things that we have to look at.
Past experience does not preclude future. You don't know that the next outcome is going to be exactly the same. You don't know that.
No, but we can look at repeated patterns, and we can look at and we can
call the scientific method. Yes, that's not faith either.
So I have to be absolutely certain that there's going to be no differential for something falling out other than what I forecast in order for me to do something. That's not a reasonable claim.
So to determine that the outcome can only be good if there is some supreme being that dictates to you what good looks like, and you have to submit to that and do it. Number one, you're literally not a moral agent anymore. You're just a robot doing what's dictated to you. Number two, that result, how do you know that result is preferable just because the dictator says it is?
Well, I got to roll this back because we're starting to get into a lot of onlys and musts again. And this is why I like to take a minimalistic approach, why I like to keep the doors open. So just supposing that you teach your kids about Santa Claus. You know that Santa Claus is a lie. You know that Santa Claus is a myth. You say, look, if you're good this year, you're going to get some good stuff. If you're bad, you're going to get a bag of coal. Now, the end of the year comes and you assess your kids' behavior based on what you told them. They're good. They got good grades. They did what they needed to do. And they get the reward at the end of the line, not necessarily because Santa Claus existed, but because you put a present under the tree and you did the right thing because they did the right thing. So there's, I think what we're starting to do is we're starting to overthink the 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 objective basis behind this behavior too much, because I've never said, and I've said this many times, but I've never said that I can prove the existence of God. I said I can argue for the reasonableness of God. Can I disprove the existence of
I mean,
Santa Claus?
I've yet to see you
Absolutely.
actually. I've yet to see you actually do that, because I
Yeah.
don't think your argument is reasonable at all. But yeah, sure.
Well, it's reasonable. It's reasonable when you look at it from a pragmatic standpoint. It's reasonable.
No, it's
But
completely
if
not
you,
reasonable. Going back to your Santa Claus analogy, look, here's a major difference between the God version and the Santa Claus version. The Santa Claus version is this: all right, kids, if you're good, you get gifts. If you're bad, you get coal. Well, what's good and bad? Well, you just have to figure that out on your own. You got to live by your own moral system. You just got to be a good person. That's left to the kid to decide what's good and what's bad. In the God system, it's, well, how do I know what's good or bad? It's whatever he says. You do what he says. And if God says to do it, you don't question it. You just do it. They're entirely different.
yeah. I've heard that, they're entirely different. They're entirely different. So what I'm saying is we're going down another rabbit hole again. So is there something else that you wanted to talk about? Because what's going on is the same thing that happened during our last conversation, as I tried to draw a parallel, and then you ended up arguing with me and then saying, well, they're entirely different. So we went down a rabbit hole, and then I had to cut it off and kind of say, well, let's get back on track again. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be as minimalistic as possible, because I want to get to a point where you and I can agree on a few things that are really essential to these discussions. If we can't agree on anything, then I don't see the point of even having any discussions about this. We got to be able to agree on something. So do we agree that there's such a thing as ethically viable behavior? Can we agree that there is such a thing as ethical integrity? Hold on. Alan, you there? Alan? Okay, so Alan's out, so we'll wait for him to come back on. Let's see. Let me go ahead and just quickly. Okay, here he is.
I'm back. I don't.
Sorry.
I think that was on my end. I completely lost signal. I don't know what happened. I am so sorry. You were in the middle of a thought of.
No, I was just saying, and I'm not going to go through it all again, but I was just trying to point out that, yeah, okay, so we have different ideas as I think our basis, our foundation of morality is a little bit different. So what was the issue that you wanted
hang on,
to
what's your foundation of morality if it's not God?
Well, my foundation of morality is God. Absolutely.
So something you're not certain exists is your foundation for morality.
Well, I believe he exists. You see, this is the thing. This is where I think we're getting hung up. Is I have to reiterate that I believe in the truth claims of Christianity. So I believe there is a supreme being. Now, if asked to prove whether there's a supreme being, can I prove it? And that's where I have to say, no, I can't prove, but credo, I believe. This is why I think when I said in our last podcast, I said, you're going to get mad at me, Alan. You're going to get very mad at me because I'm going to give you a solution that you're not going to like. And I said, faith is the answer.
Right, but I applauded you. I didn't dislike that. That's actually where I want every guest, every person I talk to that's Christian to confess and admit, because once you admit that, you have now declared that the only reason you have to believe God exists is faith alone. There's no evidence, there's no substance, there's no good reason. It's just faith. And the reason you have that faith is because, frankly, you were brainwashed to have it. You believed it from birth, and now you just embrace it, and you've gone from Roman Catholicism, and you've journeyed through all the way to universal Christian, and now deny parts of the Old Testament. Essentially, what you've done is you've tried to square all the holes that you see in the religion because you know it doesn't work, but you can't let go of the fact that you just believe this God exists, and you don't even know why you believe this God exists. You just do because it's faith alone. And so you continuously try to square it, and that's why you are where you are. I did the same thing, and I ended up an atheist.
No, that's a misrepresentation of my journey. And I'm not saying that only. Like, see, we were using these words only. So that there's a lot more complex than that. There's a lot more moving parts. I'm not using these words only and must. I'm saying that I believe in the truth claims of Christianity. That's not the only reason why I accepted those truth claims was based on blind belief. I believed in the truth claims, and I still believe in the truth claims because they're supported by reason and experience.
All
There's
right, what
it's a
are the
big
truth
machine.
claims?
It's a much. Go
What
ahead.
are the truth claims that you believe, and tell me why you believe them?
Well, that's going to take another podcast
Oh,
because we got
goodness.
to go through the whole system. It's
Okay,
hey, you, I mean,
fair
it's your
enough.
time limit. I mean, I don't
Fair
want
enough. Fair
to
enough.
keep you here.
Well, we might have to do that because I'm extremely interested to know what because the Roman Catholic truth claims would be different than the Protestant truth claims would be different
Great.
than the preterist truth claims would be different than the Universalist truth claims, and all of you consider yourself Christians that believe in the same God, even though no two gods you guys talk about are the same. And I'm trying to
Yeah,
figure out which God is the true God, and if there's 50 million gods that we're supposed to believe in, which one's meeting out this justice at the end that is supposedly reasonable?
yeah. Let's put it this way. Let me roll it back again. So how about we define God as conscience? Can we do that? Are we allowed to do that? Are we allowed to do that even in a non-theistic sense? I don't want to say, because I could go ahead and I could offer other definitions and say, well, God is anything that's higher above us that can dispense rewards and punishments. So God can be. How about we say that God is the state? Can we say that God is the state, or can we say that the state functions as a God? Can we say that conscience functions as a God
We could
in a
say prison is
non-theistic
we could say
sense? So
prison
we're
is the
going to get
God.
to yeah, we're going to get to God anyway, whichever way we go, we're still going to come back to God. We could
Right.
define
According to you, we can say that God is the prison cell for criminals because that's where justice is
God.
met.
Well, it's the prison cell. The prison cell is where the judge commits the criminal. So, that's going to be a little fine distinction. But what I'm saying is, we could say that God is conscience. We could define God as the state. We could define God in a number of different ways. And
But Brian,
these are
why
these
are
are
we
all.
even going there? Like it's
Mhm.
almost like I mean, this sounds so odd. Like we don't know what God is because nobody can actually define him. So now we're going to consider that he's conscience or energy or he's
Well, I
he's
just
a
defined him
judge in
though.
the prison cell.
I,
What's that?
I just defined him though. I said anything that's higher than ourselves that dispenses rewards and punishments and to whom we are answerable. So, in a
What
sense
makes you
that,
think? Why would you say those are higher than you? Why would you say that energy, for example, is higher than you?
well, energy is not a conscious it's not a conscious force. So is
Okay,
this
so
is again,
you're okay. So in your definition of God, it has to be a conscious being.
it has to be something that can interface with our own moral natures in at least on an at least equal plane. Okay, so a judge, a jury can do that. Energy can't do that. Um, a a state can do that. A dictator can do that. A police officer can do that.
So it
A
has to be a
teacher can do
personality, is
that.
what you're saying. A personality.
I would say, well, either an individual or a collective personality.
I mean,
Yes.
I get it. That's what I know. I understand what you're saying. But something with personality. It can't just be an inanimate object, or it can't be something that exists but doesn't have a conscience or desires.
Um, I don't know if I'm gonna. I don't really want to paint myself into that corner. I would accept that as a tentative definition.
Okay.
Because again, I've been doing this for 20 years. I when I see the door with the bait hanging on it, I usually I usually say, well, let me look see what's in the other rooms
All right, so
first.
let's then let me just for the sake of time and argument, because I do want to transition into hedonism and how that affects ethic and God and all this, because I'm anxious to talk about that. But real quick, let me just give this chance to you because I think you were going somewhere with that point. Pick one of those, call it God, and make your point because I'm just curious. I'll just grant it to you. Let's just I don't conscience,
Okay,
whatever.
so let's just say the state. Let's say
Okay.
the state is God. Let's say we're
Okay.
living in a communist country where function ideologically, the government is atheist. The government doesn't believe in God, yet they've substituted God for this notion of the state. And now the state can dispense rewards. They've got a merit system where they could take privileges away from the citizens based on behavior throughout the year or whatever. And so the state becomes the God, but it's a higher authority. It's an authority that can dispense punishments, can dispense rewards. It's an authority that can lead people to certain actions. It's an authority that can bring shame on those who transgress, that can impact public opinion regarding certain types of behavior. That serves in almost every capacity that I can think of as a functional deity. The state, even though it's an abstract notion, but it exists in a real institutional form, it exists as a functional deity. In fact, it might even be called a proxy deity or a deity in place of a deity. But that's a fairly good example. Now, can we prove the state exists? Absolutely, we can prove the state exists. Can we prove that a higher authority exists above the state? Perhaps, but not necessarily. That's what I'm saying.
All right. So in addition to the original 50 million gods, we can now add a bunch of gods that we can actually have evidence exists, and the state can be one of them.
If the 50 million gods are all real, then I think we've got a problem. That's something that in the history of religious thought, that's going to be a problem, because
this is clearly a problem, dude. It's clearly a problem. It's been a problem.
If they're all real, it's a problem.
Yeah, which one's real is what I'm asking. You come on the show, and I want you to tell me which one's real. Brian, which one's real?
We both agree. Well, I know that 50,000 aren't real.
Well, which one is?
That.
I mean, if it's going to be a problem, if there's a problem for more than one to be real, I need you to at least be able to tell me which one is real.
50,000, 50,000 can be real, then we've got a problem. I think only one is real, though.
Okay, and which one is that?
The communist state, like I said before.
So it's not So it's not a transient.
Well, I said there's a possibility that a higher authority than that state can exist, but you want proof. You want me to prove it, and I already told you at the outset that I can't prove it to you.
Well, I didn't just ask you to prove it. We were on that before. Right now, I'm just asking you to tell me which one you believe is real, and you said the communist state.
Well, that's because I'm engaging in banter. But to be honest with you, the real God is going to be the one that's above the communist state. That's going to be the one that I believe is real.
Which one? Out of all the different belief systems in Christianity, Roman Catholicism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, you name it, which God is real? Just tell me that. I don't need you to prove it. I'm just asking you to tell me, just because I'm curious which one you believe is real.
Right. It's going to be the one that transcends all those other gods. So, there's going to be a God that transcends
it. Obviously, which one is that? Right. Define him for me.
Okay, so how many people are in your family?
4. Okay,
so you got
4. You mean my immediate family?
You got a wife and 3 kids, or how do you break it down? Okay, 2 kids.
My partner and two stepkids, but yeah.
Okay, so 2 stepkids. So you're the head of the household, right?
I mean, we don't view, that's a biblical notion. I don't really view it that way.
All right. Well, but there's nobody above you, right?
I mean, I like to think that because I'm arrogant, but at the end of the day, we don't really function like that. We in our home, I make decisions that are better in some ways, and she makes decisions that are better in her strengths. So like, it's just we don't function as authority heads like Jesus and the whole system. I don't care about that system. It doesn't actually work in reality.
Yeah. Well, I guess where I'm driving at is that, if any of your kids or your wife or your partner were to go out and say, that this is what we believe or whatever, and this is how we do things, and, this is our routine, but they're representing the household, but they're not the actual, the final go-to as far as how the household works. You said you didn't use that model, so it kind of breaks down. It doesn't really work in your case, but in a normative situation, I guess in a more traditional household, it's going to be the father, or at least the father and the mother that have
I
authority
mean,
over
I
the.
think that patriarchal system is based on the Bible, unfortunately, and religion in general. But I think we are, as a society, moving away from that entirely.
Yeah.
But anyway, to your point, go ahead, keep going.
Anyways, what I'm saying is there's a lot of people making truth claims about God. And so I would say I would take a very reasonable approach to say, okay, so 50,000 gods, and you're asking me which God I believe in. I'm going to say the God who's over the 50,000 gods. That's what I'm saying. Now, we have truth claims made in respect to Christianity and Judaism. We have truth claims made, and this is one of the reasons why I think polytheism is wrong, because polytheism says there's multiple gods, and you're always going to ask the question, as some of the early apologists, the early Christian apologists ask, yeah, but who's over those? Who's over all of these gods? They're fighting. They can't get along with themselves. They're each claiming that they have the supremacy, this hegemony over the creation. Well, who's over them? I want to go to the guy that's over them. And I think that's one of the problems of religion. When we start examining, studying comparative religion, we realize that ultimately, okay, in light of all of the dissension and all of the debate concerning religion, if there's a God, if there's a potential for multiple gods, then we know there's going to be a potential for a higher God above that God. If it can exist any God, then it's got to be one God. It's got to be the final go-to. This is one of the reasons why I think Trinitarianism kind of dropped the ball, because Trinitarianism is basically a form of tritheism. And it's something that, I don't want to go down that road, but it's something where the Jews will rightly claim that God is one, Yahuwah Elohim Ahad. One. We have one God. Christ repeated the Shema. One God, Hear, O Israel. There is one God. This is why monotheism can be seen as a natural development, a natural evolution in the history of religious thought, because it's not a natural way to view divinity. Most of the time, if you look at any of the indigenous peoples, most of the time they'll start by worshiping, say, the forces of nature. They'll personify the thunder, they'll personify night and day, stuff like that. You always end up with a multitude of gods. With saying that there's one God that's over every other God, you've kind of just, the buck stops, and it has to, because it has to stop somewhere. When you study the character and nature of God, when you study claims of divinity, you realize, as every reasonable person does, that the buck has to stop somewhere. And so it's got to stop at either one God, or it's just going to keep on going on forever and ever and just keep generating more and more gods. But anyways, that's kind of a roundabout, sloppy answer, but that's what I think.
So you don't have a personal relationship with this superior God. You just think he exists because it just seems reasonable to you, but you don't actually know him at all.
I do. Of course I do. Of course I do.
But why say, well, there has to be some God? We don't really know who he is. He's just, if you have a personal relationship with him, like I can tell you stuff about my dad. Yeah. I literally can. I can give you details about him. You haven't given me a single detail about this God other than he must be superior. Well, if you have a personal relationship with him, please tell me more about him.
Well, you haven't asked me for any details, and this is where we start getting into testimony. Like, look, I'm not going to force my testimony.
I'm asking for you said you have a personal relationship.
I do have a personal relationship.
Based on your own personal relationship, you tell me about this God.
Well, like I said, to do that would involve testimony, and I don't want to get into testimony.
Why do you need testimony? I don't need testimony to tell you about my dad.
Well, yeah, you do, because you do. You actually do need testimony to tell you about your dad, because your understanding of your dad is based on personal contact with your dad over probably a period of many, many years. And so this requires at least, now you could keep those details separate. You could keep those details out of the story, but in some cases people can't, because look, I know somebody who said, I can tell you about my dad because I know what he did and I know how he treated us. And this is something where makes me believe that he's not a very nice person. That 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 allows a lot of testimony. In fact, it forces a lot of testimony into the story, into the explanation, which is why I don't want to get into testimony. I'm not here to share my testimony with anybody. Now that's a separate podcast.
This isn't a trial. Your dad's not on trial. I'm asking you just to tell me a little bit about this guy you have a personal relationship with.
Right. And the personal relationship would be, I think it would enter more the realm of my experiences. So my experiences line up with the truth claims made in, let's say, the scriptures, the New Testament scriptures, where I've had experiences where, and you might even chalk it all up to coincidence, where I've had experiences where something has happened or I've prayed for something, and then miraculously, or as it were, miraculously, that something came to pass just as I asked for it. I've had, people, harm me before. I've had people, really do a number on me, and I've prayed for them, and then I've seen things happen, and I've been like, wow. It's a personal relationship to the extent that there is a give and take on either side. And now you could say the give or take isn't real, but this is why I don't want to get into my experiences, because now we're going to get into objectivity questions again. And I've never said, in fact, I've even affirmed at the outset of this discussion that I can't give you evidence that's going to satisfy your benchmark.
Yeah, I didn't ask for evidence. And all you gave me was, well, my experiences said this, and because this happened, I believe my God exists. You still haven't told me anything about your God. You just told me more about your experiences. That'd be like me saying, well, when I was a kid, I would come home from school and there would be a house there, and I would go and lay down in my bed, and there was a bed there. I'd wake in the morning and there was food. My dad must exist. Like, I didn't tell you anything about my dad at all.
But what you're doing is you're trying to bring the war into my camp, because you don't believe in God, but you're telling me, well, my God, you need to know something about my God.
Of course I am going into your camp, Brian. Of course I am, because you're the one making the claim that God exists.
I've already said that I'm not giving you any evidence because I don't have any.
I know you're still making a claim that he exists, and I'm not asking you for evidence. I literally asked you for your personal relationship information about your God. That's it.
And I told you that I'm not getting into testimony, because this is going to require testimony as to experiences that I've had. And I told you I'm not giving you those.
I didn't ask for your experiences.
No shit, Sherlock. Listen, you've got about 1 minute before I shut your butt down.
I mean, this is my show, so I mean, if you want to leave, go ahead.
We're not going around I'm not going around in circles with you. I'm
not going in circles. I literally asked you something entirely different than I did before.
You're going around. What you're doing is you're arguing with me for the sake of being argumentative.
I'm not.
If you want to have a discussion, we could have a discussion, but I'm not going to sit here and argue with you. And you're telling me that I'm not giving you the right answer. I mean, fuck you.
Okay. Fuck me then. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I don't believe in a God.
I mean, if it's not the right answer,
you don't think he exists for sure, and then you can't give me anything about him.
If I'm not giving, what answer do you want me to give you?
Something personal about your God. You say you have a personal relationship.
What specific kind of answer are you looking for?
Tell me the kinds of things he tells you. Tell me the kinds of things he does when he talks to you. Tell me how he acts with his spouse or with his children. Tell me what color hair he has. I don't care.
He tells me if you go out and murder someone, okay, this is going to be the sentence, right? And it's going to be a certain amount of time in the state penitentiary, perhaps life. If I don't pay my taxes, something's going to happen. I might get a knock on the door from the IRS. This is something that he tells me, right?
Okay.
You see where I'm going with this?
You're back to the government being God.
That's right, because if God doesn't
Wow.
exist, then that's where we're at.
But I thought we were basing this question on the fact that God does exist.
And I said that God can exist as a proxy God, as a proxy deity. He can exist as a government, he can exist as a teacher. And I said we don't even have to define this theistically, we could define this non-theistically. You're forcing me into a specific definition because I know what you're trying to do. And I understand your position, Alan. I understand what you're
What am I
trying to
trying to
do.
do? What am I trying to do?
What you're trying to do is you're trying to force me into a narrow definition so that you can grasp it more easily and debunk it. But I'm beyond that. I don't have to accept your direction in this conversation. I don't believe that you can prove that there isn't a God, but I'm not asking you for your demonstrations. What I'm
I
asking
don't
you
have to
for,
make demonstrations. Not believing something isn't the same as claiming it
thank you,
exists.
thank you,
But no,
thank
but
you.
that's
You don't
different. Like if
have
I
to.
came to you and I said to you, I believe 100% Santa Claus exists, you would have every right to press me and say, well, prove it. And if I
No,
can't prove it, then you'd have every right to deny it.
I would say good for you, bro.
No, you
Go
would
with.
not. That would be
Yes, I
ridiculous.
would.
Well, you would also
Absolutely.
think I'm an idiot.
Oh, so I'm supposed to be knocking on a on everybody's door, asking them what their religion is, so that I could disprove it
I
for
didn't
them. I
knock
could,
on your door. You came to my show.
well, because I wanted to have a conversation. I think it's
And
a
here
good
we are.
conversation.
And here we are. I did not come knocking on your door.
Right, but you're saying that you don't have to. You don't have to offer up all of this evidence
No, I
in
don't,
your
because I did
case.
not make a claim. You came to me and said, hey, Alan, I'd like to come on your show
Okay,
because I
well,
have something I can
right,
prove that
but
demonstrates God exists
no, no,
coming from
no.
the ethics
See,
argument.
that's where you never listened,
No, I
because
can
I
show you the
never
text. You
said.
said I can
I
demonstrate it through the ethics argument.
specifically
That's what you said.
I specifically said I'm not going to prove the existence of a supreme being. I'm not going into that trap. I'm not painting myself into that corner. I said that the reasonableness based on those indicators that I gave you means that that theism can be true. I've been very, very clear about avoiding words
Okay,
like must.
fine, fair. Let's say
And
that's what you said. Fair. So
okay,
what is this conversation about if the only point is to say, hey, because there's ethics, it's
well,
possible God exists. Okay, we've
the
gone nowhere then, because that's what I think too.
okay, so well, the conversation was supposed to be about faith and about ethics, but what happened was where it derailed is because you're arguing with all of my answers, and I'm trying to give you. I'm acting in good faith, but I mean, I'm not arguing with every single answer that you give me. I'm saying that's great. In your case, I have no right to tell you that your decision to reject theism is wrong. I have
No,
no
that's
right.
because my
My
arguments are solid and they make sense.
Okay,
But
right.
anyway,
But what I'm
let's
saying is, can I finish, please?
sure. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
have no right to tell you that your truth claim regarding non-theism is wrong. Why? Because I'm not you. I can't make those decisions for you. I'm not in your shoes. I haven't experienced what you've experienced. That may be a perfectly legitimate option for you. At the same time, I have enough respect for other people to recognize that if someone thinks that, accepting the Buddhist religion or the Hindu religion or the Christian religion is reasonable for them, it works for them, I don't feel that I have to bulldoze down their door and argue with them and put a bat up their ass because I don't feel it's the right religion and I don't feel that they have evidence for their claims. I think your problem, your fundamental problem is you've never left Christianity. You've never left evangelism. You're not Christian in a creedal sense, but you're still a Christian in a practitional sense. You still evangelize. You still engage in polemics. You still have a podcast. You still write books. When I took a break from apologetics in 2011, buddy, I walked. I put my Bible on the shelf. I went about my business. I walked. I didn't I didn't involve, I shut down all my blogs, all my websites, and I didn't have anything more to do with apologetics or even the Bible. For a couple of years, I didn't even read the Bible. I was able to break the pattern of behavior. And a lot of people that I'm looking at coming from your side of the fence are still in this cycle of behavior, which they've never left, which is just simply a continuation of their own evangelism. Why can't you just break the pattern of behavior? If God isn't real and you don't believe in God, why can't you just walk away instead of trying to convince everybody else that your views are correct and theirs are wrong? It's the same thing you were doing all the years when you were a Christian. You're still a Christian in the practitional sense. You're still an evangelist. You're still waving your opinions in their face, telling them that they need to believe you. Why can't you walk? If God's not real, there's no point. There's no point in any of this. I mean, what we're doing here is nothing in light of eternity. It's a fraction of a second. We're just gnats. We're just flies that will live perhaps for a couple of days or perhaps a week. What difference does it make? Why not just get the most out of life? And that's where you would say, yes, hedonism. Hedonism is the answer, because now I'm focusing on the here and now. I'm living in the moment. I'm doing all of this. But you have to admit, Alan, and I'll hand it back to you in just 10 seconds, you have to admit this isn't hedonism. This is doing something higher than just appealing to your own sense of pursuing pleasure. This is something that's deep. You're still interested in God because you're still engaged in a lover's quarrel with God. You're still engaged in passionately lovers' quarrels with those who believe in God. I think you're thinking of God way too much if God doesn't exist.
So, first question is, do you respect people enough to not say fuck you to them?
Well, sometimes.
Oh, sometimes. Okay, so apparently you're choosy with who you respect. Got it. Number two, it's my turn. You
won.
Long time.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Number two, you are absolutely incorrect that I should just walk away and that I'm actually acting like a Christian evangelist. Major difference here. Number one, as an evangelist in Christianity, I did that because I was commanded to by God, who I believed was the ultimate standard for me in some way. I was a fucking robot just doing what I was supposed to do. So now, as an atheist, I genuinely believe that that is a mind virus and a brainwashing that needs to be removed for people to be as happy as they possibly can be. I actually give a shit about humanity, and I care very much about helping my fellow man and my fellow human. This isn't about obeying commands or doing orders. This is genuinely about caring. And you are wrong also about me admitting that it is the hedonistic way to go out and live it up and eat babies and, whatever else you think I'm going to be doing as a hedonist. No, this is hedonism, caring for your fellow man. What makes me happy is seeing people free. What makes me happy is being a good family man, a good father, a good husband. What makes me happy is trying to respect the people that I'm around and not say fuck you to them. What makes me happy is genuinely caring about what's going to be the most benefit to me as an individual. I am a hedonist because I genuinely believe that what I'm doing right now is what's best for me and also best for society and my fellow man as a result. That's my view, and you are completely way off on your view of what I think.
All right. I want to apologize to you, Alan, because I shouldn't have said that. And I'll be honest with you. Look, I'm just like everybody else. I say things sometimes in anger or in frustration that I regret. So I do regret that, and I apologize. Look, I respect you as a person. I respect you quite a bit. I remember, your years in full preterism. I remember those years, and you were a great guy. You were at the pulpit. You were a fine, upstanding man. And I think you probably still are. I really do. I think that you and I think we could, go out and have a talk over a cup of coffee or whatever. And I think you and I would agree on a lot of things. But it's this ideological, this warfare, there's us against them sort of mentality that has just permeated our culture that I think is preventing us from even just agreeing on some basic commonalities. Like things like, well, ethics are important. We agree on that. But then it always has to be about theism versus non-theism. Why can't we just have a cup of coffee where you could be an atheist and I could be a theist, and we don't have to argue about existential matters? Why can't we agree that murder is wrong and certain behaviors are wrong? And okay, if there's no afterlife, then we should be punished for it in this life. But we don't have to argue about everything. That's the thing, that's one of the most objectionable parts of Christianity that I think people will point out who have been in Christianity for a long time and then have ultimately left it. One of the most objectionable things about it, they'll say, is the fact that they're always arguing and infighting with each other. And I agree. This is one of the reasons why I left the debate field, because I'm like, debate, everything I tell you, you're gonna deny anyway. I'm not saying you personally, but the people that I was debating, it's like everything I say, nobody's going to accept the evidence I bring to the table. So it's like, why am I wasting my time doing this? When you get out of Christianity, one would think that there's a more liberal spirit, and sometimes there is. But what I'm seeing within the new atheist groups, chat groups, or whatnot, I'm seeing a lot of people that have angst against Christianity, perhaps well-founded angst, but who are also have never really broken the cycle of behavior that they were in when they were polemical, dedicated fundamentalist Christians. It's sort of still like it's a sort of a fundamentalist form of atheism, which is fine. That's great, perfect. But does it really bring about the peace and healing that you say that it does, or that you hope that it does? I don't know. I don't think so. And not from what I've seen.
Well, I mean, you've never been an atheist, so you can't experience it, obviously. And
like
I also don't speak for other atheists, because we're not some denomination. We're not some religion or some organized group with a faith statement. Like, we literally are just people, individuals who reject the claim that God exists because we don't see sufficient evidence for it. We're not making any claims beyond that. We're also not saying a certain scientific method is right, or making some statements about how we should or shouldn't live. Like, literally, atheism is nothing more than a denial of the existence of God because there is no evidence, period. That's it. In fact, I might as well also be called an a-Santa Clausian, or an a-unicornist, or a Göringist. Like, it doesn't freaking matter. Call me any of those, because I don't have a belief system rooted in atheism. Atheism isn't a belief system. So whatever other atheists may do, they may or may not be assholes. I don't know. I have no connection to them. They're not my fellow brothers or my fellow community. There's nothing like that. So whatever you may see in other atheists, you cannot push on me, and vice versa. Like, I may be the asshole sometimes, but that doesn't mean atheists are assholes because Alan was an asshole. Like, that's just not the way it works. My concern, like, I don't claim to have some Holy Spirit that fills atheists to make us better people, whereas Christians really should be better people. And it blows my mind that you all don't act completely according to the fruits of the Spirit, which is like, here we are 2,000 years later after the resurrection of Jesus, and you all still can't get along and still can't act right all the time. And by the way, that is a caveat. I forgive you. And we can just let bygones be bygones. It's okay. I understand. Out of frustration, I might have just as well done the same thing. Of course, like I said, I don't claim to have a Holy Spirit, so I feel like I could be excused for it, but that's okay. Be that as it may, I do forgive you, and it's fine. We just put it behind us and move on. It's okay. But anyway, so yeah, I don't speak for all atheists, and all atheists don't speak for me. Christians should have a unified banner, and there should be more symmetry and some more compatibility going on there, where you all could actually present the same case consistently. And maybe if you all did that, it would be like, oh, wow, they're all saying the same exact thing about God, and yet none of you are. So I don't know what to do with that information other than say, that's kind of specious. It's very suspicious that this God who wants uniformity and not disagreement can't seem to bring you all together to help you understand who this God is. But it doesn't matter, because we've just established all Christians don't speak for you either. So you have your own version here going on, and it's not a certain God. It's just an idea of a God that's going to somehow bring justice at the end. Is that fair?
Well, okay, let me let your remarks go. What I wanted to do, though, is I just wanted to say that, and this is at $10 on Amazon. It's a great book. It's called Wrestling with God. It's a Unitarian Universalist guide for skeptics and believers. And what the author does is he says he's amazingly, is a Christian, or actually as a Unitarian, he straddles the three A's of atheism, agnosticism, and affirmatism. So he says that a healthy skepticism and even a healthy atheism is a good thing because we want to strip unworthy conceptions of God from our vocabulary. So I think you would agree that a God in the Old Testament that, say, promotes genocide or promotes stoning of people and stuff like that, I think that's a God that's unworthy of any kind of divinity that we would even choose to worship. Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah.
Okay,
we found
See, I scored a win. I scored a win because we both agree with that. We both agree, not because you gave me the answer I was looking for, was because we both agreed that is that if there is a God, okay, that's not God. That can't be God. So we agreed that God is probably not even on the menu. So right away, right there, I think there's a point of unity between you and myself, because that makes me a skeptic, doesn't it? At least according to a Christian standpoint.
Sure. Well, the good news is my work's half cut out for me. Now all I have to do is prove to you the God of the New Testament doesn't exist.
Yeah, see, that's going to be a little bit harder to do.
Yeah, but it's not as hard as trying to prove both.
Right. Well, let me put it this way. That would be another discussion. But I do think that as long as if we could get rid of that character, I think we would be on a more even plane, because I think there's a lot of there's atheists that I've talked to that seem to be reacting towards that God. And I think it's a false representation of deity in many cases. Now there's a substratum where I think we see that, okay, he's merciful, he's loving, he's kindness, but then he spoils all that by engaging in behavior that we wouldn't even consider to be civilized in this day and age.
Yeah. So just understand though, Brian, like I heard what you just said, and there may be some atheists that became atheists because of that, but I'm here to tell you my view of the God of the Old Testament had no bearing on my escape of Christianity at all. Like there was no connect. In fact, I didn't even pick up on some of these things I talk about with the God of the Old Testament until 3-4 years later after leaving Christianity. So it was nothing to do with that. In fact, when I left Christianity, I was full-fledged in still thinking this God was awesome from beginning to end. I wasn't even where you were. I just defended him at all costs, and I just woke up, and the story's all in my book, How to Kill God the Easy Way. So if anybody is interested in the book I wrote, if you can see it, I don't know how to do this. It's it's terrible with these. Anyway, I can't do it. There it is. How to Kill God the Easy Way. Grab that because it talks all about my journey and everything. But anyway, point is, yeah, that is not my chief argument. Do I have problems with the God of the Bible? Absolutely. And I hope that some of those will help wake Christians up to the evils of this God, much like you've observed. But that is not at all the reason I escaped. And nor do I think that will help a Christian escape. I just don't. I don't think that's going to make any difference whatsoever. Because if in fact we would get out of Christianity based on all of the things that we see this evil God do in the Old Testament, we'd all got out a long time ago. You already see it, and you're still not out. So I know for certain that's not going to get anybody out of Christianity. So I don't use that argument as my primary thing. That's more of an extra to add, not my primary thought.
Right. Well, I'm not looking for a way out. I just don't think that. Yeah, I mean, I just don't think that's a valid representation of God. But neither does this guy. Neither does this guy. I like to be a little bit more liberal in my understanding, because, let me play in your ball court for just 1 minute. I know we're kind of running out of time, but I just want to play in your
before you do, I'm going to let you say this. I wanted to say this real quick to give people a chance to start asking questions right after this thought. Regardless of what it is, I'm not going to try to respond. So I guess this is your chance to give me the uppercut. But start putting your questions in. If you guys have any for Brian or I, please direct the question, unless it's for both. And I'll start reading through the questions as soon as Brian's done this thought. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in deference to you, in deference to your view, we could say the same thing about Santa Claus, I think, as we can say about any religion out there that misrepresents God. So we have, say, the God of Fred Phelps, who I think Fred Phelps was a 5-point Calvinist, but he used to have those parties when when an LGBT person would die, he would have these parties and he would hang out big banners, thank goodness, thank God for, use all these slurs. That God is just as false as any God that, say, any of the nations worship. It's as false as a Hindu god or a Buddhist god or a shamanistic god. And then there's multiple gods like that. There's multiple false definitions of deity. So look, we could say they're all false. We could say that one view is right and the others are wrong. But ultimately, what we're getting to is that even if you're a theist like myself, and even if you're a Christian like myself, you still have to look at false conceptions of deity and say, and exercise some healthy agnosticism and some healthy skepticism and say, that God is not, that version, that portrait of God, that painting of God, that word depiction of God is not true. So we still, among ourselves, we still have to exercise those judgments. But that's a ball in your court. That's a trophy to you, my friend, because you're going to say, well, maybe the supreme God doesn't exist. Maybe he's wrong too. And that's something that we would have to save for another discussion.
All right. Fair enough. Thank you for the closing out. All right. So at the beginning of our conversation, let's see if any of these questions pertain, and I'll start scrolling. Remember, if you have any questions, this is your chance to ask either Brian or myself or both of us. Let's see. I don't know if some of these are questions. Bob from Canada, from your site, Brian, asks, how can the just be saved by faith if they have proof of God? Why does God value faith? Is it not obvious in a world of liars and unfaithful people? I don't know who that's directed at. Maybe you want to take a stab at that. I don't know what he's quite.
Yeah, I mean, Bob is a good guy. He's been on my show a couple of times. I really think that he makes a good point. Ultimately, we have to accept truth claims without evidence. I'm just going to put it that way. Ultimately, if somebody makes a truth claim, we have to accept it without evidence, simply because no evidence exists, or because we don't have the resources to determine if that truth claim is correct. A lot of times it's a resource problem more than, say, an objectivity problem. So I'm just going to answer it like that, because again, I don't want to give people a wrong impression and make them think that, I'm doubting, or I'm in a situation where I'm doubting. I have every saved by faith. Thank you. If I was saved by what I did or what I said, or I try to keep it right, but occasionally I mess up. So got to be saved by faith. But can I prove? No, obviously not.
Okay. Very well. JP Cody asks, why worship an imaginary divinity? I'm assuming that's directed at you, since I don't worship an imaginary divinity.
I wouldn't worship an imaginary divinity. I don't think that would be a right claim to make. So look, assuming that the Christian God, I'm talking about the God revealed by Christ, not the Hebrew God, but the God revealed by Christ, that God doesn't exist, then why worship him? That's a good point. But I don't see, this again, it gets to faith. I don't believe that that's an imaginary deity. So that's something that I accept on faith. And that, of course, modifies my behavior.
Okay, well, it's a kind of a follow-up question, and maybe you answered it already, but just, maybe just give a brief summary. Why do you believe?
Why do I believe? Because the truth claims that I find given in the Christian scriptures are both reasonable and they agree with my experiences.
Okay. I don't know if this is a follow-up as well. So you have to make up another God because you don't like the government? Fair question, I think, based on what we talked about.
Well, if it's a communist government, God save us from communism. I would make one up anyway just to get me out of that.
Well, maybe that's the solution to atheism. I might be with you on that. Contrary to popular belief, atheists aren't communists, but okay, whatever. And I guess that's it. One more question here at the end. I see from Michael Clark. Was Alan wondering if Esther had a last name? If so, it was Buffon. I'm not sure I'm following. I'm sure there's a joke here. I just don't. Do you understand it, Brian?
I
Michael, if
don't.
you're still there, maybe you can help us idiots grasp this, or maybe it's not a joke. But if you want to, if you're here, I'm gonna give you about like 30 seconds here to try to help us understand this, or should we just let it go? I don't know. If Alan is wondering, was Alan wondering if Esther had a last name, and if so, it was Buffon. Esther Buffon. Esther Buffon. I almost feel like there's a wordplay here going on that I'm missing. Esther Buffon.
Probably is. He's probably thinking of something that is, I don't know, risque maybe. I don't know. Michael
Maybe.
Clark.
Esther
I don't know.
Buffon.
I know him, superficially. I don't know him that well, though.
Okay. Well, anyway, thank you. Oh, here we go. He said, yeah, let it go.
Yeah.
All right, cool. That's probably the right answer. All right, cool. Thank you all for watching. This was absolutely delightful. We really appreciate you. Brian, also, thank you for being on the show. When you have these kinds of discussions, certainly at some point they're going to get a little tense. It's just the way it goes when you're coming out from two different perspectives. So I'm not angry with you for that moment.
No.
It's okay. And I apologize if you felt like I was attacking in an area that I shouldn't have been attacking. It's just the way conversation goes sometimes. So we're just going to move on. And I still feel like this was a really good conversation. I feel like we benefited from it. Lots been learned. I learned a lot about universalism. At least your version. This is cool. It's just opened my eyes to see a whole different version of Christianity. So appreciate it, Brian. We'll be in touch. Perhaps we'll do a third, see if we can think about that. And otherwise, thank you again for being on the show. Thank you all for being a part of this and supporting this. Please, if you want to see shows like this continue and to help me be able to continue to do this with my time, go ahead and join Patreon or just drop me a one-time donation. Just help me out. There, you'll see it in the information section. Otherwise, everybody, thank you and have a great day.